Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the lectern our moderators for this special session, Yvette Raphael and Sean Mellors.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this special session, the Prudence Mabele legacy, and what a legacy Prudence has left. My name is Yvette Raphael, a friend and fellow activist, and I'm committed to celebrating Prudence Mabele's legacy. Look to your neighbor and say, she multiplied.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sean Mellors, a dear friend and comrade of Prudence Mabele. Our session today is focusing on honoring that legacy and celebrating the personality that is Prudence. I am honored to celebrate my friend.
My name is Prudence Mabele from South Africa in Johannesburg, Wattville Township.
I'm from Positive Women's Network as an executive director in South Africa and an Ouling member. I sit at South African National AIDS Council representing women of South Africa. That council help to advise the Deputy President of the country on issues around sexual and reproductive health and HIV.
We really sick and tired of the stigma and discrimination and the isolation that we have to put up with no jobs because of your status. Everything is just going so bad. But why?
We are telling our government that it's quite urgent that they provide treatment, care and support. We need to prevent death to zero. We need to also fight discrimination and stigma.
Women who live with HIV is not that stupid, especially when statements were said, we were insulted. We are being influenced by external outsiders. How can anybody influence me with my life? This is my life. This is any woman's life who would stand firm and fight for our lives.
In South Africa, we are leading with HIV and AIDS at the age of 10 to 19. 2,343 girls are getting infected weekly. What are we doing as the country? What are the messaging that we want to see our kids growing as? If under 10s can rape little girls and we're doing nothing.
She was raped. We got the news the next morning. What are you going to do? Because this important uncle is an important uncle. So we saw it unfold.
So many things were said and they were lies. We were damaged. My soul will never recover, and I will never recognize also the President of South Africa. I will never. He doesn't exist and I don't care.
He is not a well-respected president. He has done things that are disgraceful to South Africa. So we can never respect our president. We want him to know. We want Zuma to go.
I'm taking these candles to that room, eh? Okay.
I think more than anything, we have talked, we have done everything. Now it's time for us to stop all of that a little bit and action. Politicians can be in our summit. They will say all the beautiful things, but in actual fact, we still have the same, I want to even call it like shit going on. I think we are in the right track, and we will get there. But I don't know in which decades we are going to be able to change women's life. Maybe I will be a grandmother, toothless. But we are going to have to, prove that we can change. We can change our own situation. The solution lies with us.
Amandla, long live the spirit of Prudence Mabele, long live. Long live the undying spirit of Prudence Mabele, long live. I'd like to ask the pillars of PWN, the leaders, the women of PWN, to join me on the stage as I read my speech. What words come to mind when we think about Prudence Mabele? Inspirational. She inspired so many women to take charge for their lives and circumstances that break the chains that held them back and enslaved them of life of self-pity, fear, and victimization. Visionary. Fierce. She was able to articulate challenges facing women in HIV and AIDS sector and was militant and unafraid. So if you are doubting about where we're going with activism, I need you to remember that. Motivational. Many girls and women were saved by her words of encouragement. There is a significant testimony out there of women that were able to face their families, their communities, and regain their strength, pride, and purpose through her words of support. She touched and inspired change in thousands of women, emboldened a generation of girls that are able to stand up for their rights. Her passing left a huge void in the lives of many people. She left a void in the women's sector, she left a void within our network of positive women, and most unfortunately, she left a void in her own organization, Positive Women's Network. To understand where we are, it's important to get a context of the background of PWN. The Positive Women's Network was, South African Positive Women's Network was established in 1996 to create an environment for people living with HIV to experience freedom from stigma and discrimination. PWN seeks to ensure that people living with HIV and affected by HIV share and lead responsibilities in responding to HIV. In practical terms, PWN takes care and supports programs that harness and build resources and capacity and supports and monitors the development initiatives to improve the quality of lives of women and children. It also engages community services and programs to positively empower marginalized women and other people living with HIV in South Africa. PWN's work has impacted the lives of thousands of women infected and affected by HIV in Gauteng, Mpumalanga, Eastern Cape, and KwaZulu-Natal, where my comrades are from. Apart from directly addressing the need for treatment care for women living with HIV, PWN recognizes the synergy and intersection between health, well-being, and gender-based violence. To this end, its core work is enhanced and complemented by intervention and advocacy to promote gender equality and human rights, to support and empower women to achieve a sound socioeconomic and political environment in their communities within the context of the HIV pandemic. In July 2017, the untimely death of our comrade Prudence Mabele, who was the founder and executive director, resulted in a huge leadership gap within PWN, and the women's rights and HIV movement were just taken aback. At the PWN level, the intervention of a broad range of stakeholder engagements and individuals resulted in a constitution of an interim board comprising of old and new board members tasked to with a single mandate to turning around the fragile situation of the organization. Since the interim board has implemented a range of decisions and activities, particularly with respect to governance programs, communications, office space, as well as engaging stakeholders of the PWN network to seek input and support, build trust and confidence with respect to PWN's future. This provincial consultations held will form part of the strategy to improve organizational governance. This process will be supported by hosting an annual general meeting for the network, and the election of a new executive committee will happen, and the appointment of a permanent executive director is needed. It is envisioned that once this governance structure is in place, that the organization is in compliance with the constitution and strategy formalization process, and will be instituted to shape and guide the efforts of PWN within the next 3 to 5 years. PWN remains a key player in promoting the rights of girls, young women living with HIV, as well as the efforts to address the risk associated with HIV and AIDS. Currently, PWN lacks the funds, resources to fill its mandate and the immediate need to address the program gaps that is created. In terms of our priority, we plan to raise funds to support the organizational activities, including augmenting human resources, essential operation function, and key programs and activities that will align to PWN's new strategic plan. Whilst we acknowledge the support provided by our partners, especially the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, UNAIDS, Thousand Currents, USAID, AVAC, and the African Women's Development, the sheer magnitude of the challenge facing the women's sector demands that active support and resources be made available for PWN to fulfill its mandate and for Prudence's full legacy to realize. We need your support, and we look to your hearts to help us see Prudence Mabele's legacy through. Thank you.
We would now like to show you a video from Darren Walker, President of the Ford Foundation, and Nicolette Naylor, Director, South Africa. They are unfortunately not able to join us today, but through their support, they are helping us to honor Prudence's memory.
Of the many visionary leaders the Ford Foundation has been fortunate to know, few rise to the level of Prudence's legacy and her tradition. Prudence was a remarkable, courageous, bold woman who carried the torch for justice and fairness and equity. At the Ford Foundation, we've had a long history of supporting women. So to those women who will receive this award in the future, we say congratulations. Job well done.
This year, the AIDS conference is going to be missing Prudence Mabele. For us in South Africa, Prudence, or as we call her in South Africa, Comrade Pru, Auntie Pru, was a South African hero, but also a global icon. She was able to take the local struggles of HIV-positive women from South Africa and connect that to global struggles of the HIV movement and influence both the local and global agendas. And I think that's what we admire about her. Comrade Pru was a visionary, ahead of her time in many respects. If we think about the fact that she disclosed her HIV status as a black woman in 1992, at a time when stigma and silence was all that surrounded this disease, she was willing to be courageous and speak out. That took a real courageous leader, a fearless warrior, to come out and speak in the name of women's rights, in the name of HIV. She was also ahead of her time in terms of speaking not only about treatment but prevention and the importance of prevention. And she was making the connections around violence against women, reproductive justice, and HIV long before it became fashionable to do so. I think that Comrade Prue was also so important to this movement because she was willing to challenge those in power. I think we all remember Auntie Prue as being willing to put up her hand and speak truth to power in a room full of powerful people. She would ask the uncomfortable questions. And I think that's why we, as the Ford Foundation, have wanted to dedicate this prize to fearless warriors and to women who are willing to speak out in the name of social justice, in the name of HIV and human rights. And I think if Auntie Prue was alive, she would probably be saying to me now, why did you wait until I died to give such an award? Why didn't you do it when I was alive? And I think she would be right. And we need to think about that. We need to be honoring the brave, fierce warrior women who speak out for social justice, for women's rights and for HIV when they are alive and not after they die. And so we are hoping as the Ford Foundation that with this award we can honor women while they're alive for their bravery and for their courage and for their commitment to social justice and HIV. Thank you.
The incredible comrade who was Prudence. The International AIDS Society created the Prudence Mabele Prize through an endowment from the Ford Foundation and the Open Society Foundations, and in partnership with the Positive Women's Network. I'm now going to call on Yvette to come and hand out the Revolutionary Prize, as she calls it, to the first recipient.
Thank you, Sean. This award is a revolutionary prize. It is a prize that comes with commitment and expectations of accountability, not being silent and not being afraid to raise your voice. This prize recognizes these qualities in the recipient and therefore gives me a great pleasure to introduce the first recipient of this award prize. Honoring the legacy of Prudence Mabele, Dudu's leadership and courage in her work advocating for sex workers community embodies so much of what Prudence stood for throughout her life. They both share a vision of social justice that seeks to protect the human rights of the marginalized groups. We are delighted that Dudu has been selected as the first prize recipient of the Prudence Mabele Awards for the values, spirit, and activism that she clearly brings to this work. Mandla. Mandla.
I salute Ma'am Prudence Mabele. Amanda Prudence Mabele, Amanda! Amanda! Good afternoon, everyone. I'm extremely honored to be receiving such important award. I have known and worked with Prudence Mabele for many years, and it is an honor to be receiving the prize in her name. Prudence Mabele was fearless, always strive for justice, and act based on what was right. She was a trailblazer, activist for the rights of the women and people living with HIV. She was the first black woman to publicly reveal her HIV positive status in South Africa in 1992. She made deep connection between the fight against HIV, feminism, and gender and reproductive justice. I'm also grateful for these recognitions to be seen to be following in Prudence's footsteps, because I am very sure that every other nominee for this award was capable of winning this award. I also accept this on behalf of all of the other sex workers that make my work possible, and on behalf of all my colleagues and comrades at Sweat and Sisonke and Mother for the Future. I have faced several challenges on my way here, but each one of them has only strengthened me to make me the person who I am. I am grateful to share the same determination that Prudence had. It is a privilege that I may carry on this legacy with my own work. Let me bring you in my world for the moment. I am a sex worker. I am a mother. I am a Sisonke organizer, the movement of sex workers in South Africa. I am an advocacy lobbyist at Sweat. I am an ambassador of the Coalition of Children Affected by HIV and AIDS. And I work with sex workers, mothers in South Africa to help them and their children. Our children are not getting anywhere near the HIV services they so desperately need. We do not have enough money to take our children to clinic. We cannot afford to give them the food they need to stay healthy. We cannot afford the uniforms and materials for their schooling. We cannot afford to keep them safe while we are going out for the work. We have to leave our children and babies at home by themselves because we need enough to feed them. Even when we do have the money, it's still hard to protect our children from the discrimination that surrounds HIV. Sex workers face stigma and discrimination directly. Our children face double stigma and discrimination. Those children face daily rejection and abuse at school and their communities. In South Africa, by doing sex work, you're breaking the law. Many do not believe we should be mothers. Many of us do not have a home address, so we cannot register our children for social services. They are cut off from many services that every child should have. Many of us die from HIV and violence. If we die, our children are forgotten and they are out of the system. Stigma destroys families. As a sex worker mother, we find it hard to tell our children what we do for a living, and it's even harder to talk about them about HIV. When our children become older enough to understand, they are so often so angry and ashamed that they are leaving home. They go off by themselves with no one to care for them. They are fragile bond between us and our children. It's broken. Last week, I visited 2 sex workers' mothers in Cape Town. They're living under the bridge with their 3 babies. They cannot go to clinic. They do not have money even for the bus fare. They cannot register their babies. They are far from home with no community around them. Me and my colleagues, sex workers' mothers, have organized ourselves into a project called Mothers for the Future. We club together to help each other. We bring these mothers nappies and food for their babies. We teach them about their rights and with the policies and social services. We use our own money to travel to the poor areas to give advice, comfort, and help. We create safe spaces for mothers to meet and be capacitated. Sometimes we have to do sex work just to have enough money to pay our own bus fare home again. We give them money so that they can take care of their children and their children to go to clinic. We help them collect medication. We buy uniforms and material to help their children attend school. We change trust to carry each other's children so that we're going out for the work, we know they are safety. We help mothers improve their own life, and we are with every step of the journey for the long term. But we cannot do this alone. Our money does not go far enough. The support from this prize will help mothers' projects thrive. We have set up in Cape Town and are starting to build support system in Johannesburg and Durban. This funding will help us in strengthening our current support system as well as perhaps helping other mothers and their children in areas. Going house to house and meeting different mothers, we have found alarming gaps in medication for children, as well as profound stigma and discrimination. With extra support, we can help make sure that all package of social of the sex workers reach their children. We are mothers, and we like all mothers. Our children comes first. I'm now asking you to put them first. Put them first when you are thinking about who help. Put them first when you are making your plans. Put them first when you are judging, when you have made a difference. And all above, remember that what keeps other children safe from HIV may not work for children of sex workers. We love our children, and they deserve a chance at a better life. What you do today could be the lifeline. Here are some thoughts. Donors, you should expand HIV funding and programs to include social and economic intervention, in particularly social protection and early childhood development for sex workers and their families. Everyone, we must all champion comprehensive national strategies for children affected by HIV and AIDS that include integrated families, age-specific support. And we all to give more resources and decision-making powers community and community-based organization, children and families. Finally, I want to say it is wonderful to see so many sex workers and other activities at the AIDS conference. I want to come back in two years, but I know as a sex worker I will be properly never get visa for the USA. Ask the organization to reconsider AIDS 2020 in Trump's America. I really appreciate, and for behalf of all my fellow colleagues, on behalf of all women in South Africa, that we are looking forward to put legacy of Mam Prudence Mabele. Pambili no Mam Prudence Mabele, Pambili. Pambili. I thank you.
Congratulations once again, Dudu. Certainly a worthy winner, and Prudence is probably looking down on us and saying, yo, she did it. We now move to the part of the celebration which involves talking, and we all know how Prudence enjoyed talking. It's hard to believe that she was with us all at the last AIDS conference, talking and singing a lot. We knew that she was not the world's best singer, but she always led us in song. But in order to do honor to Prudence's legacy, we also need to ask hard questions, as that is what Prudence did so well. No BS, no bullshit. Our panelists are our award-winning Dudu. We have Nono, who knew Prudence for many years and is now working at WHO. Patrick, who's the president of the Open Society Foundation and former US ambassador to South Africa. And Mercy, an award-winning activist who uses her own experiences of stigma to drive the commitment of equality for young people living with HIV.
Thank you. Dudu, what does this award mean to you, and how will you use it to continue in the fearless fight, in the fearless legacy of Prudence Mabele?
It's encouraging me not stopping to fight for the sex workers' rights and their children, also including other general population in terms of responding in HIV and AIDS. I will not stop. It's also encouraging me to go on and fight for the social justice for the women and children.
Thank you.
No, turning to you now. You've known Prudence for a very long time, at a personal level and I think also at a political level, because you knew her as an activist, a leader, a campaigner, and someone who would often toy against the government and admittedly sometimes against you in terms of inaction against government policy or the inaction of government. Can you share with us what were the qualities in Prudence that made her so fearless and that you admired?
Wow. I think what stands out for me when I think about Prudence is the fact that Prudence was authentic. You know, what you saw is what you got. Mm-hmm. Never put on airs, never presented something that was not real or true to her. You know, as an activist, it was something that was really always refreshing, because you could sit down with Prudy and have a conversation. I think it's also important, you know, to underscore, you know, affirm the fact that Pru and I first connected as women. Mm-hmm. You know, mm-hmm. One of the things that really resonates is that we grew up in a country that didn't recognize us as human beings. So to fight to become something is something that connected us. And I think for Pru, what I admire and what I continue to take forward was just the fact that she was so honest. She was truthful, she was fearless, and she remained the same. You know, you would never really find a different Pru, whether she had money or didn't have money. We spoke about things that were important to women, you know, secrets about how to do things, you know, what to do when we got into trouble. That was offline. But it was easy, I think, even as representing government, to connect with Pru, you know, because one wasn't scared. I knew she would tell us where we were going wrong, and she would speak about what was happening in her life and bring the realities of people living in the community to light without turning them into something that makes her more important. So those are the things that I admire. Those are the things that made it easy to work with Prudence on behalf of government, but most importantly, to continue the fight for women's emancipation in South Africa and across the world.
Thank you, Nono.
Thank you so much. Now to you, Patrick. OSF is often at the forefront of addressing and supporting difficult issues in difficult contexts. Characteristics central to that of Prudence's advocacy, but we also know that funding for civil society organizations, including PWN, is no longer there. What do you think needs to happen to change this?
thank you so much for the question, Yvette, and for helping to convene all of us. And I'll answer the question by taking a little bit of a journey. But first, Yvette and Sean, really want to thank you all for what you've managed to do here today. Emotional pain can be debilitating, it can be paralyzing. You've managed to take the trauma of Prudence's passing and you've turned it into an emotive force for good and transformational change. And I think everyone here should acknowledge that and commend you for it. The last time that I was privileged to be in Prudence's company was in Durban at the conference then. I saw both sides of her because she and I sat with one another during some part of it, and you're right, Sean, she was pretty chatty. Didn't matter what was going on stage, she'd be talking in your ear. But it was a thoughtful engagement in the house, but in the street, she was pure fire. And the memory of that is what charged us up to be able to help fund and support this prize. The South African writer and gender activist Sisoke Misamang wrote this incredible eulogy after Prudence had passed, and in it she said that Prudence was a Pied Piper for the brokenhearted, and that her activism was fueled by pain and passion and joy, and that she put her body on the line so that even now, when they try to mess with us, and you know who they are, they know that there's going to be a comeback. So for me, Juju represents that comeback, Mercy represents that comeback, the hundreds of young black women activists in particular in South Africa and who are here in this conference represent that comeback. So it was incumbent upon us to fund this prize in order to be able to give face and expression to all that she stood for, especially at a moment when we're seeing the rise of more and more elected authoritarians in one country after another, including my own, who are closing off civil society space. And then we're also seeing not enough conviction from donors and funders who should be stepping even more forcefully into the space of human rights, gender rights, and linking it to the struggle to overcome HIV. I'll just say one last thing, just to be clear, right? We all need to say that sex worker rights are women's rights, sex worker rights are human rights, sex work is work, and the struggle to decriminalize it is really essential to the work to push back on HIV.
Mercy, as a young woman living with HIV who epitomizes the spirit of Prudence, what qualities do you think are important for us living with HIV to make a meaningful contribution to the HIV response?
Yeah, I think it's just about waking up and knowing that you are worth something, and knowing that even if that is ignored, that is still a fact, and knowing that you can push that agenda to drive the narrative of the HIV response in the correct way, and that we can't sit down and be silent because so-and-so said this or so-and-so said that, but it's about pushing forward and constantly moving forward.
Thank you.
No, thanks, Mercy. If I can come back to you, because I think Prudence fought against many things, including gender-based violence. And we know that South Africa as a country is struggling with higher levels of gender-based violence. But what do you think that we, and I mean the collective we, need to do differently or can do differently to begin to address this?
Sure. It's a lifelong struggle. I doubt that there is a single woman in this room that can say they haven't experienced some level of gender-based violence. I keep asking myself, where do we start? And I think, to be honest, I think men are missing from this, you know? I actually have started to become a little bit averse to the word resilient. You know, when somebody said, oh, women are resilient, I keep thinking, but why should that be? Why should it take women extra effort to just be? You know, to just live, you know? Why must it be like that? So my sense is I really, it baffles me. I try to understand the world of animals, and I've never seen in the animal world a male raping its child. I can't understand human beings. I can't understand a man of 15, 20, 30 raping a baby. I mean, come on, let me understand this. So until we unbundle this, we constantly are putting the burden of doing something on women. Do this, women do that. Women, I want men to stand up, to tell me what they are going to do about gender-based violence. I want men leaders to stop pretending they are not doing it. Don't wait for us to discover you or to be found out, you know. Just stand up there and say, well, it's happening, I'm doing something wrong, and I'm going to lead other women to men not to do this. I think you've put enough weight on our shoulders as women to do something about this. I think, you know, men need to be told. Young boys need to be told, when you have an erection, you don't have to do anything about it. Just leave it. You know, just leave it.
Take a shower.
It's not going to kill you. It will stand up and it will go down. That's it, you know? So something is wrong.
Yeah.
For teachers and leaders to fail to teach that in schools, we are opting out. For mothers and fathers and the faith-based and anybody who is in a leadership position to disown the fact that they feel things, they want to do something, but that there's a way that it can be done that doesn't harm the other person. I don't know how you explain this. How do we become people who can be on the moon and then we don't respect just the basic fundamental right of somebody's body when they say no?
Thank you. Patrick, you were... Yes, indeed. I think it's a huge challenge. You were also the ambassador in South Africa for a while, and Nono's challenged us as men to stand up. How do you think men can and should stand up in order to address gender-based violence?
There are a number of things that need to happen, but let me first acknowledge the incredible, brilliant partnership of Nono when she was in South Africa. There was not a truer champion on this cause and somebody who, through really difficult times, managed to create a program that has bent the curve in South Africa. So now that I'm not an ambassador, I don't have to be diplomatic and political, right? So let's call it what it is. And Prudence was a first-class equal opportunity bullshit caller. So in the spirit of that, I'm just going to say something that I think is really important. So I'll address your issue, but I think the first thing that we need to do in order to make change, and as men, one of the first things that we need to do is to step back and not claim space that isn't our own. Let me give you a perfect example of that. And those who are here from the South African government know that I love you, but I have to say this. So when I went through the Global Village, I came on the South African booth. And I was excited. I saw the big picture of Albertina Sisulu, so that like immediately drew me in. But then after that, I go in and I see wall after wall of men, male politicians, like blown up, epic size, signing agreements, shaking hands, promoting the great work that's being done. That, you know, I guess we're supposed to understand that by extension, they're the ones who are doing it on this issue. Let's be really clear here that change happened in South Africa because of black women like Prudence. Let's be 100% clear that everywhere we go and throughout all of our countries, change continues to happen because of the agitation of activists who are mostly women. So that's you know, just if we want to like end these norms, we got to like call bullshit on ourselves, step out and celebrate women like that, and men like Simon Nkosi, who of course was such a huge figure in South Africa. So let's not revise history and let's not impose ourselves on history first. Second is that we have to take on the responsibility as men to model. And to not talk about these issues in remote ways, but to use our own example in service, and most essentially, to be vulnerable in those spaces. As ambassador, I had one of my best experiences was when I joined colleagues from PEPFAR, and we went and visited a series of mobile clinics where young men were coming for education on sexuality, coming for medical circumcision. At some point, I remember having a conversation with a number of them in a circle, and people were not forthcoming about their challenges, and I started talking about my truths, what I experienced as a young African-American male, and the mythology that was always imposed on me about my own sexuality and how I was expected to act in the world. And I lifted up that truth versus what the reality was for me as a young, insecure, frightened person in a society that oppressed me. And I just talked about what the dynamic meant for me. And then I saw a conversation unfold that would not have been possible if not for that male vulnerability, which is incongruent with how we are expected to act. I believe very firmly that people are policy, so that when Nono and others are building their teams in government, we just need to make certain that in addition to all the traditional qualifications that we expect to see on a CV, that we really need to tease out this issue of example, this issue of modeling and vulnerability, and true sympathy and solidarity.
Great. Thank you very much, Patrick. Yvette.
Yes. Thank you. Now that we're calling out the bullshit and Prudence clearly sent us a signal, I have a question for both Nono and Patrick. Women in South Africa are facing a huge backlash for standing up for what we say we honor tonight. What would you tell women of South Africa who are being attacked for being brave and standing up against patriarchy and sexual harassment? We're calling out the bullshit, right?
You can't stop. The only thing I can say to the women of South Africa is we've got to keep the fight up. You can't stop. You know, let's take the lessons from Prue. Prue didn't stop. I think that's what history is imposing on us. You know, let's socialize our boys properly. Let's take responsibility for others who don't want to take that responsibility, but never be silent. Honestly, if I could rewind some of the parts of my life I lived, I would rewind and remove that fear that I had of politicians way back. If I knew that 10 years later those people wouldn't matter, I would not have been as scared. So I think you must not be scared. Politicians are just politicians for a time. So whilst they are there, push the pressure. Push the pressure. Don't stop.
Thank you.
I would tell them three things. The first is that they are not alone. The second is that they are the most powerful generation of active women that have ever walked the face of this earth, and they need to appreciate how much agency they have and take full advantage of it. And the third thing that I tell them as somebody who has worked in politics all of my adult life is politicians generally act from a place of fear, and they fear you. And having that appreciation and that recognition should govern a different kind of agency and a different kind of agitation. Actually, there's one last thing that I would tell them as well, that in addition to those three things, that they have to take up the Prudence voice, the do voice, but they have to connect that voice to data and to strategy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Would you like to add on, Dudu, in terms of what it is that we need to tell South African women what they need to do in terms of addressing patriarchy?
Is to, first thing, you have to be no fear, no scared, have a passionate, stand up for our rights so that we can able to fight the system. The second thing, what it's not going to be stopping, we're not going to stop fight for decriminalization of sex work in South Africa until the laws will be removed that criminalizing us. and our children. And the third thing that I would ask, I want to sit very nicely because I want to address this very carefully. I am sick and tired of these policymakers and lawmakers who come from their own houses and with their patriarchy system, with their own beliefs, with their own decisions, and put it in forward and say they're criminalizing us because we are bad mothers. We are not bad mothers. We are not bad sex workers. We are working. Sex work is work. We want full decriminalization of sex work in South Africa. Let's go back to South Africa so that we can able to respond in gender-based violence. We're able to respond in HIV and AIDS. We advocate for the healthy sex worker and the safety sex worker. Those things you will never separate under Human Rights Bill of South Africa. We're living in the country of the good constitution, but it's difficult to implement. I'm pointing this to those doing those policies and laws who label sex workers as criminals, that from now and go on, I will push the legacy of social justice for sex workers and their children.
Great, thank you very much, Dudu. And Mercy, I think the last word's coming to you. So as a young woman living with HIV, what would you tell your colleagues and your comrades about addressing and challenging patriarchy and gender-based violence?
Is that it needs to happen, and it can't just be something that we brush away. You know, a report recently came out in the UK that 42% of women living in the UK living with HIV are in poverty. We're twice as likely to be, domestically abused. Some people have faced abuse in healthcare settings. It is not good enough that we call ourselves a leading country in this fight against HIV, and we have statistics like that that people live through every single day.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately our time is up. We could easily have continued the discussion for another hour, but I'm going to ask my sister Yvette to have a few concluding remarks, and just a very big thank you to all of you for honoring Prudence and allowing Prudence to live in the work that you do every day.
I think this is the beginning of the unfinished business of Prudence Mabele, the unfinished business of her activism and her fearlessness. I think what we see here today is just continuation, and I'd like to say thank you to each and everyone in South Africa, women around the world who've decided to multiply because Prudence lived.
Great. To our panelists, thank you very much, and Dudu, once again, congratulations. I know that you will put the prize to great use and continue the big fight. And thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Amanda, away too. I knew they would sing. Thank you. How are you?
It's good. Thank you.